The League of Women Voters of the United States is a nonpartisan voter education organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. It is the League's position that voting is a fundamental citizen right and must be guaranteed. Our Brews and Views presentations will not necessarily reflect League positions, but we feel it's important to give a voice and give a forum for community members and experts to inform our members about issues that are important to voters. So Teresa, okay.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Teresa Reed. I'm co-chair of the program committee for the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. Tonight, we begin our set of quarterly programs exploring criminal justice reform and restorative justice in Washtenaw County. Our Lunch and Learn programs, held on the fourth Friday of the month at noon, are also dedicated to criminal justice reform this quarter. The U.S. incarcerates a higher percentage of its citizens than any other country in the world. With 5% of the world's population, we have nearly 25% of the world's prisoners. The U.S. spends tens of billions of tax dollars annually to keep more than 2 million men and women in prison, a vast increase in the last 40 years. Prisoners of the United States are primarily poor and people of color, with policing practices like arbitrary traffic stops, broken window patrolling, and cash bail, imprisoning people for trivial or non-existent offenses and further impoverishing them. The human cost of mass incarceration in the United States is incalculable, and the social cost is staggering. Shattered families, crushed potential, lost workforce and creative contributions, and diversion of public funding away from schools and other social goods. Solutions to the complex problems of mass incarceration begin with local law enforcement practices. We are so fortunate in Washtenaw County to have brilliant leaders devoted to ensuring that our justice system lives up to its name. This program tonight presents two of these leaders, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce them. Victoria Burton-Harris serves as the Chief Assistant Prosecutor for Washtenaw County. She's devoted her career in both her private firm and then in public office to youth development and criminal justice reform, to spurring investment in community and divestment from the criminal justice system. Ms. Burton-Harris believes a progressive prosecutor pursues fair and equal justice for all, promotes the goals of individualized justice, and is transparent and accountable to the people. Ms. Burton-Harris's work has been highlighted by CNN, Democracy Now!, The Guardian, Essence, The New York Times, The Appeal, the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, and local Detroit news stations, Fox 2 Detroit, WDIV, and WXYZ Detroit. Belinda Dulin is the Executive Director of the Dispute Resolution Center, serving Washtenaw and Livingston counties. As the Executive Director of the DRC, she and her team have implemented a variety of conflict resolution programs in district and circuit courts. Additionally, the Dispute Resolution Center provides services to schools, helping students, families, and school staff identify and resolve barriers that affect relationships in the school setting. The DRC partners with the Washtenaw County Peacemaking Court to provide peacemaking circles to families in the child protection and delinquency systems. You can see why we're excited to welcome these women tonight. Victoria and Belinda.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Teresa. And because Belinda was here first, both on the earth and in Washtenaw County, I'm going to turn this over to her for her to start, and then she'll kick it over to me.
Okay. So thank you also to the League of Women Voters and all of your supporters for taking a moment to really look at this topic inclusively and look at it at the local level as well. I am very pleased with the work that we have started at the DRC, and I am over the moon about our partnership with the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office and working very closely with the Chief Assistant, Victoria Burton-Harris. We have been working all year, actually, since she's taken office, probably before she took office formally, getting our ducks in a row and preparing ourselves to implement a restorative justice program. And what I am most pleased with and want the community to understand that this is not a shelved program. We're not taking this off a shelf and dusting something and tweaking it a bit. We are really building it out in a way that meets the need of the residents of Washtenaw County. And we take great humility in that we want to do this with utmost respect and responsibility to those whom we serve. So again, thank you for having us here. And I'll kick it over to Victoria.
Thanks so much, Belinda. I echo Belinda and her appreciation and expression of such. Thank you to all of you all at the League of Women Voters for having us here tonight and talking about something that is near and dear to both of us. Obviously, we are two Black women who, we are quite familiar with our history in this country and our history prior to our ancestors being brought to this country. And I always start with colonialism and the fact that a stolen people were brought to a stolen land. And that was really when we began to see the foundational bricks being laid for what we now know as the criminal legal system. And I'm very intentional with the language that I use, not just as an attorney, but as a person who understands history, having spent time here in Washtenaw County at the University of Michigan, pursuing a political science degree and an African-American history degree, and being very well aware of the nexus, and the connection that Black folks have in this country to the criminal legal system and the political system. When you talk about justice, you'd have to look very, very hard and very long to find anything that resembles justice in our current criminal legal system. And I think the most accurate term, quite frankly, would be criminal injustice system. But I know that that's not a term most folks would embrace. And so you may notice that Ellie and I, we don't use the phrase criminal justice system. We use criminal legal system or criminal punishment system, because that is in fact the most accurate term. And that is what this system is that we operate within. When you think back and you study the history, and it was so eloquently laid out just last month here at the League of Women Voters at Brews and Views, you come very quickly to understand that this idea that the criminal legal system is broken, it's not true. This system is not broken. This system works exactly as it was designed to work. Again, stolen people were brought to a stolen land, and those of my ancestors who made it, who did not die after they were packed into the bottoms of ships, they found themselves on foreign land, and contrary to what many would believe, they were not initially enslaved. They were indentured servants, but soon thereafter, it became quite clear that Black bodies were needed to build the economy of this country and to maintain it and keep it going. And so that's when we started to see this shift from indentured servitude to slavery. And then we saw a shift from slavery to this era of Jim Crow and Black codes. And then we saw another shift to mass incarceration in the era that we find ourselves in now. And with each of those shifts, there was very intentional acts done by our government to ensure that Black bodies continued to build this economy and to keep it going. So this idea that the war on drugs was something that was needed to root out something that was so dangerous and harmful for our society, many of us now know that that was very intentional, and that Black and brown communities were targeted intentionally in order to keep them in an enslaved state so that the 13th Amendment would apply to them, and therefore we could continue to further capitalism and use their bodies in order to boost the economy of this country. And so when you talk about the criminal legal system and how Black folks are a part of that, you cannot talk about the criminal legal system without analyzing capitalism, without analyzing America's oldest sin, which is racism, and having a very robust conversation of how those are all connected and intertwined. And so then the next question for many people is, well, how did we get here? How have we allowed this to happen? And Teresa spit out the answer: local government. It did not just happen on the federal level. Sure, laws were implemented that allowed for this to happen. Obviously, the 13th Amendment allowed for it to happen. But when you look at what was happening on the ground in a lot of these cities, it was law enforcement, right? Like if you look at the history of law enforcement, just police in and of itself, that's a racist history there, right? We know that police officers started off as slave patrollers and slave catchers in paddy wagons. And that's not to say that law enforcement now is full of people who are that hold racist views, because we know that that is not true. But we do know, and we cannot turn away from the origins of policing. And then you get to the prosecutors, the gatekeepers of this system. Prosecutors are, quite frankly, the most powerful actor in the criminal legal system. It's not the judge, it is not a jury, it's not a defense attorney, it's the prosecutor. Because prosecutors decide who comes into this system and who stays out. Prosecutors decide who to charge, what to charge, and when to charge. A prosecutor has the ability to look at a charging request and determine if there's a different route that's more just, that's more equitable, that's in the interest of justice, or they decide if they simply want to be able to check off boxes that all the elements have been met. So sure, if all the elements of a crime have been met, let's bring this person on in. And that is something that prosecutors have been doing for a long time, hundreds of years. And my philosophy as a prosecutor is, if prosecutors can be intentional about imposing harm, especially on marginalized communities, and when I say marginalized communities, I'm referring to people of color, Black folks in particular, poor folks, folks dealing with mental health issues and substance abuse, behavioral health issues, if they can be intentional about attacking them and bringing them into this system, then why can't I now, alongside Ellie, why can't we be intentional about giving them an off-ramp, keeping them out, or giving them an off-ramp to get out of the system? And that is exactly what we are doing. I don't know if many of you know that I ran a progressive prosecutor race alongside Ellie in a neighboring county, in Wayne County, at the same time that he was running here in Washtenaw. And that's how we got to know each other. We became friends, and we quickly saw that our views and beliefs were aligned. And we had an appreciation, he as a civil rights attorney, myself as a criminal defense attorney in Detroit, we had a healthy appreciation for what this system does to people, right? We understood that, you know, this system, once it gets a hold of you, it's like you are on a wheel, and it's cyclical. It is very, very, very hard to get away from this system. Even if you land on probation or parole, we know that statistically, a lot of people are not successful, and they come back time and time again. We know that we are increasing the likelihood of someone and their children being forced to live in poverty just by us criminalizing them and deciding to bring them into the system to begin with. Because when they come out much different. They come out with a criminal record. They come out with this scarlet letter. You know, they're dubbed a felon forever. And that decreases their likelihood of thriving, and not just surviving, but of thriving, of being able to be, you know, contributing members of society, right? And not take from society. We know that, quite frankly, a lot of crimes are committed out of desperation, lack of resources. Folks are living in resource-starved communities. When I go to certain neighborhoods on the south side of Ypsilanti, which I've done with one of our members here, I see Kathy Wyatt in the audience. She explains and she teaches me, she takes me around, and she says, you know what? There's not even a grocery store anywhere near this housing complex, this apartment complex. What does that tell you? That people, marginalized folks, are stuck in certain communities very intentionally, segregated from other folks, segregated from resources, not able to get anything that they don't scrimp and scrape and fight for. So, what do we expect of them? When you have children living in very segregated, resource-starved neighborhoods because that's all their parents could afford, because their parents weren't afforded a good education in order to have a good job or even a good career, and therefore they've been relegated to a ghetto, what does that do for our young people? Our young people are not being able to connect with other children who don't live around them and who don't look like them. That means that they're not having people come over to their homes because maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they don't have much of a home and it's just a place where they lay their head. And that, quite frankly, is a part of the foundational reasons when you look at the reasons why our young people are ending up in the criminal legal system. It starts there. It starts, with where they grew up, the resources that they did not have access to. We often talk about fighting for our young people. We often talk about understanding that a lot of these problems, they manifest in anger, right? But we very rarely talk about restorative solutions and practices. And restorative justice is not new to Washtenaw County. In fact, I've recently learned, again, through Kathy Wyatt, that restorative justice and restorative practices have been a part of this county for quite some time. If you go on over to Ypsilanti on the east side of the county, over to the Grizzly Center at Ypsi High, you'll find that our young people are using restorative practices to get to the root cause of some of their problems. Our young people may not know why they're angry, but they have the resources, thanks to the Grizzly Center, to be able to dive deeply and be able to ask themselves, what am I angry about? Why am I responding to my teachers or to my colleagues, my peers, in the way that I'm doing that? And it really gets to the root causes of the harmful behavior. And the problem is we're not doing that on a level across the board with our young people and our adults. And what we're doing instead is saying, oh, you act out, you misbehave. We're going to discount the fact that you've been victimized yourself, that you have not been given what you need. And we're just going to simply respond punitively to the behavior that we are seeing. Never mind digging beneath the surface. And that's the modern day criminal legal system. And Belinda and I are working with both of our offices together in a partnership to change that. And I'm going to kick it back over to Belinda so I don't talk the entire time about, restorative justice and what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And then after you, Belinda, if you want to kick it back over to me, I'll happily kind of explain more about how it fits into the criminal legal system.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria. I always appreciate listening to you and getting that foundational piece, that historical piece, which I think is why so many are turning to restorative justice and practices throughout the country and actually throughout the world. We find ourselves being a part of a great movement at the DRC, and we're very proud of that. So I want to talk a little bit about the DRC's journey in getting into this work and some of the things that we've been doing. And I think what's most important is to understand why we do it. In addition to the history that Victoria has shared, as an African-American woman growing up in an urban city, some of the things that she's noted, I saw growing up as a child, how criminalization of certain neighborhoods occurred, my neighborhood, how children were criminalized as well. I was part of the first cohort in a public school system where metal detectors and police were being placed. That was happening in the 80s when I was in high school. So the Dispute Resolution Center, as many of you know, has been around for quite a while, about 30 years at this point. We were one of the test sites if you will, for our state Supreme Court and the State Court Administrative Office to see if community dispute resolution could be viable in our state of Michigan. After some years of that piloting and working with the legislation, our state Supreme Court, or the State Court Administrative Office, created this very formal program that places organizations like ours throughout the state of Michigan that service particular counties to provide opportunities for people to problem solve, with the thought that if they were doing that, they would not go to court. So the goal at that time was to reduce the dockets in court. I'm not quite convinced that that goal was achieved, but what happened instead was that these community organizations like the Dispute Resolution Center became a part of the tapestry of what problem solving could look like, providing mediation services. And at our DRC here in Washtenaw and that service Washtenaw and Livingston County, we always challenged ourselves to do more in being a service, to be of service to the community. So shortly after the ACLU published its school to prison pipeline report, which is probably about 13 years now, we were challenged by a staff person of the ACLU to get involved, to do more in the community. And we knew that there was a school district on the east side of the county that was struggling the most: high suspension rates, high dropout rates, high levels of poverty. And as we explored that further, we also saw that there was a disconnect or a breach in the relationships between the teachers and the students and the administrative staff. Now, I don't want to say that everyone was not able to work with the children, but I want to say that that is a critical piece of the chaos that was occurring in that district at that time. So the DRC began to take a deeper dive into restorative practices. We wanted to be of service, and through a grant, we were able to deliver services there. And what we experienced was children did not have the tools of constructive problem solving. Now, as a woman from an urban community, I understand that physical fights is a system of problem solving. It may not be the most constructive system, but it is a system that most times, most children learn very early in life. So we went in and gave them an alternative approach to problem solving, an approach that did a number of things to them. And they actually shared these comments with me, and I wanted to share them with you. I actually went back and looked at some past reports. Kids began to tell us that they felt included. They had a voice. Oftentimes, their behavior was being misinterpreted. Their language was being misinterpreted. So they had, for the first time, an opportunity to explain what was going on from their perspective and to articulate what was missing in their lives, what their needs were. And as you might guess, many of those needs were connected to the issues of poverty that Victoria has already named. We also talked about, with the students that we served, their ability to be empathic. It is my belief that with the implementation of zero tolerance policies, we remove the opportunity for conflict to be a moment to learn for our children. Through conflict, we learn a lot of things about ourselves and about the people in our spaces. The restorative practice work that we were doing allowed kids to hear firsthand how their behavior was impacting someone else. So they learned to be empathic. We learned that the restorative approach addresses the whole person and their ecosystem. So the incident at hand presents the conflict, but all the stuff underneath it has to be addressed as well. So we began to build relationships with these young people to really understand what their unmet needs were about. We had to acknowledge their ecosystem. Oftentimes institutions look at children and we think a traditional home. In many communities, the family unit or that ecosystem includes uncles, aunts, grandparents, cousins, and neighbors, members of the clergy, long-term friends of the family. So we began to help kids think through who is their ecosystem and how those systems can be supportive of them as they continue to engage in school. It is a humane process. There is nothing that I have ever read or discovered or experienced about a restorative conversation that left a person feeling inhumane. There was no attack on my humanity, and we do not attack the humanity of others. So this model of problem solving, this model of being, allows us to tap into the core of our humanities as we connect with people, as we understand, as we accept them for who they are and work with them where they are in life. A very humane system. And then what we discovered for kids who were often sent to the principal's office, who were labeled as at risk or bad kids, who were always challenged by an adult in the building, they learned to have a sense of purpose. The restorative dialogue helped them reconnect with a community of supporters. And they too had a sense of purpose. They wanted to contribute to this community that they now can navigate. And what many people don't understand, the restorative dialogue is pretty difficult and challenging. If you have been harmed and you sit in a circle with the person who harmed you, with the bravery to address what hurt you most, being brave and feeling safe enough to be vulnerable in that space, that is pretty difficult work to do. And likewise for the person who did the harm, we're asking them to listen with the heart. We're asking them to explain or acknowledge the impact that they had on another person's life with their own behavior. And we're also asking them to take responsibility and to repair the harm. And that is very different from what was happening traditionally in schools. So so at that point, we recognized that we were onto something really good that was very helpful. And we began to prepare ourselves to widen our services to be as inclusive as we possibly could. Many of you who have lived in Washtenaw County for a long time know that this was not an easy task to work with the court system or the criminal justice system specifically. And then with the results of the election, we now have a prosecutor who is open to this, who will implement this work, and the same benefits that we saw with schools, we know that we will see with those who are in the legal system, the legal justice system. We know, as Victoria has already said, that many people who do harm, they're in a survival mode and it's out of something of desperation. And with the restorative dialogue, restorative justice practices and opportunities, they will have a chance to heal the harm that they may have caused. And we're being very, very specific to those who have survived that harm, the victim, if you will. We want to really be centered on their needs and give them a voice to engage and direct how these conversations will unfold. That is something that never happens in the traditional court system as I've witnessed it. And it has been my belief, my firm belief, that the experiences that we had with schools will mirror or does mirror what we see in the legal system. You break a rule or you break a law, you get punished and you get excluded. In the restorative model, we want to keep everyone together and be inclusive and give people an opportunity to learn and grow from their mistakes. And I think very importantly, connect with the resources that they need in the community so that they will not create that incident again. And Victoria, I can kick it back to you if you want to get more specific around where we are.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about restorative justice and the origins of it. At the beginning of the hour, I shared that restorative practices, they originate from the African culture and indigenous people and their culture. And it is exactly as Belinda just stated. When someone commits harm on someone else in their community, in African villages, it was not even thought of to just banish them. There was nowhere for them to go. So what do if you can't push them out? You bring them in. You bring them in and you sit them down in a circle with the person who they harmed and you talk it out. You allow the person who has been harmed to be the center of this and to say exactly what they felt and what they need to be as whole as possible. And then you also focus and center the person who did the harm, because they need to not only be held accountable, but they need to be at a place where they understand that they are in charge of their own healing. And that is exactly what they need. They committed harm because they were hurting and they need to be healed from whatever that hurt is. And you can't heal from something that you don't understand. And so to bring it to modern times, for instance, when a person goes out and decides to rob with a gun, so armed robbery, rob someone at gunpoint. And when you sit that young person down and you dig a little bit deeper, you might be surprised to learn that a lot of those folks, especially the young folks, they don't want to do that. I represented, when I was a criminal defense attorney, a young man who in fact had been charged and had committed armed robbery. And I was always a proponent of restorative practices in my own office. Before we set foot in the courtroom, I need to be able to understand what's in your head and what kind of life you lived before I can get someone to understand in a courtroom, be it a judge, a prosecutor, or a jury. And if I don't understand, I can't make them understand. So it's imperative that I take the time to understand you. And this particular client that will never leave me, he told me, and at the time I was not married, so my maiden name was McCaskey, and he called me Miss Mac. And he said, Miss Mac, I didn't want to do that, but my mom has a drug problem and he had siblings at home. And McDonald's was taking him away, the job that he had, it was taking him away from being able to watch and protect his siblings from the kind of activity that his mom was allowing in the home. And he was fearful for his siblings every time he went to work at McDonald's. And so instead of going back every day to report to McDonald's to make a couple of dollars, he thought, in his words, he could hit a lick and rob someone in order to get quick money so that he could take care of his siblings and his mom without having to be away from them for consistent, extended periods of time. And he said, I don't want to go down this path because I know where it's going to lead. I don't want to end up in prison and I don't want to end up dead. And I fear who I also might be becoming. That broke my heart. And that's why it'll never leave me. Because he understood what he was doing. He just didn't have in his mind any other options, and he didn't have any resources. He certainly didn't have anyone in his life who could sit down and listen and redirect and explore more of why he was doing this and why he was doing some other things. But when I took the time to sit down and do that, he was an open book. He was waiting, I think, for someone to sit him down and force him to dig deeper and to ask himself why he's engaging in the behaviors that he's engaging in. And so then I took that as an opportunity to ask him if he's thought about the harm that he's caused those who he has robbed and who have been on the other end of some of the other crimes that he had committed. And he said no, because that was too painful for him. And it would stop him from doing what he was doing. And I said, well, then that's what I need you to do. Because obviously, you know, you need to stop this. I need you to think about what you have done and what you have taken, not just from the person that you interacted with and harmed, but their family, their spouse, their children, their parents, their village. And I would always end my client conversations with making sure they understand the connectedness, right? That they are connected to the very people that they harm, and that they themselves were once that person sitting in the seat of being harmed and being victimized, and how, because they never took the time to heal from that and some other things going on in their life, that's contributed to them being who they are and doing what they're doing. And that is really one of the core values of restorative justice: connectedness. Understanding that we are all connected to one another. We cannot live without one another. And that's why it behooves us, those of us that are in positions of power, to do all that we can to keep people in this community. This community is better and stronger together. When you look at the drivers of violence in communities, the reason why people engage in violent behavior and are sent to state prisons, you find some of those drivers are segregation, poverty, lack of opportunities. When you go and look at prisons, you see the same elements there: segregation, poverty. I mean, literally working for sometimes less than $1. Lack of opportunity, disconnected from their families. So it is really insane to me, insane, that we believe the best way to respond to harmful behavior is to punish, just simply punish, and put people in a place that mirrors in a magnified way the harmful environment that we just plucked them from, as opposed to saying, we're going to invest in you and the community, because we don't want you to continue to cycle through this system in a circular fashion, because we can see for years the way we've been responding to harm, it does not work. Teresa noted at the very beginning of the hour, we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world, yet we are not the safest country, not by far. So obviously what we're doing is not working. And the fact that we continue to do it, that is insane. That is the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, yet expecting a different result. And so to be able to have an opportunity to deviate from the traditional criminal legal system, where people who are charged with crimes and named as defendants are, quite frankly, disincentivized to engage in restorative practices, because maybe that means you're sitting down and you're fessing up to some things that you've done, not just with the current case, but with maybe some old things that were never charged. But if you do that, don't you have a fear as a defendant that you might be charged by the prosecutor? Of course. So people are not incentivized to dig deeply and then to answer questions of someone who's been victimized. And when I've studied, restorative justice over the years, and I've studied it from several different folks, and the most recent is Danielle Sered out of Brooklyn. She wrote a book, Until We Reckon, and she runs a restorative justice program called Common Justice. And when I've met with her in person, she flew out here to Detroit, met with me. We've had very robust conversations. Her book is excellent. And I've also spoken with folks who run her program in Brooklyn. And all of the research and all of the folks who have really been front and center across the country with this movement toward, reforming our system and moving into a more holistic area of restorative justice, they have all said victims want the answers to their questions, and they never get that. And as a criminal defense attorney, I really had not thought about that until a few years ago. That when are they allowed to speak? When do they get to say something? One, they're not even in the case caption. It's the state of Michigan versus the person who harmed them, versus the defendant, versus John Smith. So that the heading of a criminal case does not even acknowledge the person who's been harmed. And then the prosecutor's office, which does not represent victims, it represents the people of the state of Michigan. The prosecutor's office has victim advocates who advocate for victims, right? But when are victim advocates given a platform to stand up in court and say anything on behalf of the victim that they're advocating for? Never, never. The only time that someone who has been victimized is allowed to speak freely and openly is at the very end of a case, at sentencing, when they're given a victim impact statement. And notice I use the word statement because they don't get to ask those questions and actually get answers. They don't get to ask, why did you do this to me? Why did you pick me? For folks who have lost loved ones to murder, they don't get to ask a victim, why did you choose my child? Why did you take him from me? They don't get to ask, what were my child's last words? That is something that I have heard as a prosecutor, mothers of slain children really wanting to know. And that is something that our current system does not allow for them to have an answer to. Victims want to know that they will be safe, that they will not have to worry about this happening again to them or to someone else. I've spoken to victims over the years and in my quest to understand more about restorative justice and the impact that it has both on victims and defendants. I've spoken to them and I've asked them, well, do you feel like if someone is sent to prison and they can't get to you, they can't harm you, that then you have some closure and that then you feel safe? Very few say yes, very few. What you will oftentimes hear if you ask victims that question is that they still live in fear because they know that almost 90% of people who go into MDOC, actually a little bit more than 90, I think it's 92%, they come home. They're coming home back to the same community that they were plucked from. And they're not coming home, quote unquote, rehabilitated, because we know cages don't rehabilitate people. Again, if that were the case, we'd be the safest country in the world because we love to put people in cages. We incarcerate more than we educate. So obviously that doesn't work. And you'd be surprised to know that many victims, they look on Otis. They look on the state prison's website and they look at that outdate to see if it's changed. They look to see how close they are to that outdate and they live in fear. Restorative justice allows for them to have that closure. It allows for them to ask the questions that they want to ask of the defendant. It allows for them to take part in a co-created accountability plan and sit down with the person who harmed them, as opposed to a judge saying, you're going to do X, Y, and Z because that's what a probation department who sat with you for about an hour or less has recommended that you do based on the allegations and the facts that gave rise to the crime that you've been charged with. A victim gets to sit in that seat. A victim gets to have agency and some control and say, you harmed me and I want to be able to play a part in your healing and in your accountability because that's what brings me comfort. That's what brings me closure, to be able to sit across from you and have a conversation with you over a period of 1.5 years and really see your growth. That makes me feel safe. That reassures me that this won't happen to me or to anyone else again. And the flip side of that is, because I'm always a proponent of ending mass incarceration. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to become a prosecutor, because of the power that we have to end mass incarceration as opposed to furthering it. The flip side of this is defendants. most of them who look like Belinda and I, they have an opportunity, instead of going to a cage that will do nothing for them except for exacerbate the problems that caused them to go there to begin with, they have an opportunity to really dig deeply, to be able to say what that young man said to me in my office. I don't want to be doing this, but here's why. To be able to tell someone in some way how they have been harmed, how they have suffered, to be able to really unpack the layers of trauma that come from being segregated in ghettos, forced to attend schools that, despite the age that we're living in, can be quite segregated in a lot of these communities. To be able to talk about the impact that drugs and undiagnosed, untreated mental health issues have had on their families, be it a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle living with them, or them themselves. To be able to really peel back the layers and be vulnerable in a safe space, and to be able to answer the questions of someone that they've harmed, of why. Oftentimes, people are committing crimes and they don't know why. They're not even thinking about it. Again, they're doing it out of desperation and survival. A lot of times, our young people are committing very violent crimes because that's all they saw. A lot of our young people are living in communities where they don't have good role models. A lot of our young people are living in communities where their fathers and their older brothers and their uncles are not in the home or the community with them, but they're hours away at MDOC, at a prison. And that's how they grew up communicating with them and seeing them. So that really has become normal to them, that it's okay if I do something and go to prison. My dad was there, my uncle was there, my big brother was there. It's okay if I want to join a car theft ring. I'm making money. My older brother did it. My uncle did it. And that's just the way that it goes in my neighborhood, in my community. But to be able to get that young person in a healing circle and to ask some of those restorative questions, to get them to dig a lot deeper than they've ever dug before, come face to face with what they've done and who they've done it to, that's life changing. And I'm not just telling you that because I've studied it. I'm telling you that because I've spoken to people who have participated in restorative justice programs across the country. And even though we here in Washtenaw County are not using restorative justice on some of our more serious cases like murder and sexual assault, right? I've spoken to folks who have been victims of sexual assault. I've spoken to folks who have engaged in restorative justice and have had a loved one killed. And it works. It works. Not only has restorative justice helped to heal someone who's been victimized in the most horrific way, but when you speak to folks who have been defendants on the other side and have gone through restorative justice programs and used restorative practices, it changed their lives and it made them want to turn around and offer the same services and assistance to other people, because it's something that they said if they had when they were younger, they would have taken a different path. If they had been taught to be more self-reflective, they would have taken a different path. And so in the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office, we are working to build out both a deflection and a diversion restorative justice program. Deflection is for pre-charge, meaning before our office authorizes a criminal charge, the moment we get the police report from a law enforcement partner, instead of saying, okay, sure, looks like certainly a crime has been committed and it certainly is in society's best interest and safety to go ahead and authorize this charge. Instead of doing that right away, having a victim advocate immediately reach out to the victim to talk about restorative justice and the options that it brings compared to the traditional criminal legal system. And if that victim says, you know, I do want to go down this road, then being able to refer the case over to Belinda and Jermaine over at the DRC where they have highly trained facilitators that she herself has taken time to help train, right after she took time to help train my victim advocates here in my office on restorative justice. And she will work with the defendant and the victim for 1.5 years. And if all goes well, meaning that both folks and their support folks are showing up for healing circles, and they are co-creating an accountability plan, and they're working that accountability plan. And these plans are specific, folks. It's not just, oh, say you're sorry, check. Oh, go to school and finish and get your diploma or get your degree, check. Go get a job, check. No, it's definitive. Finding out what this person who's caused the harm cares most about. What are they passionate about? What do they like to do? Let's tap into that. And then maybe one of the conditions of your co-created accountability plan is that you go and complete successfully 2 semesters in a culinary arts program. So it's not just, oh, you just go to school. No, it's something that it's almost tangible, that they have been able to state with some specificity that they're going to do, and they can actually work toward that goal every day. They're showing up for 1.5 years, going through this process, and every time they're together, really digging a little bit deeper and unpacking the layers of trauma, and then being able to come out on the other side, accountable for the harm that they caused, understanding the impact that their harm has caused, not just on the person that they harmed, but also on themselves. And then being able to come back to our office in the form of a report from the DRC. And then we rip up the charging request. We don't authorize the charges. Exact same process happens on the other side, but it's not called deflection, it's called diversion. And diversion happens after we have charged someone with a crime. And so folks may ask, well, then why would you even do diversion? Why not just do all deflection? Well, that's because we cannot, while someone who's been victimized makes up their mind if they want to do restorative justice, we cannot, if someone's sitting at the jail, just sit on this while they wait to figure out what they want to do for days or weeks. We have to decide if we're going to charge or not charge. And if it's something that we would charge otherwise, eventually we're going to have to do that. And we understand and acknowledge that people who have been harmed, depending on how they've been harmed, they may not make that decision to do restorative justice in the first few days of being harmed. But maybe after a couple of weeks, they come to us and say, hey, you charged this case. I can see already that I'm not going to get what I want. I don't have an opportunity to speak. I don't have an opportunity to even speak to the defendant. And that's really what I need. I need them to get help. I need to know why they did this to me. That's what will satisfy me. I now am ready to explore and pursue the restorative justice avenue. And then we'll say, okay. And that's the diversion side of it. So again, we in this office and over at the DRC, we believe that people can be redeemed. We believe that all people have value. And we understand the power that we hold. If we say that we truly want to end mass incarceration, this is one of the main ways that we do it. Just simply stop sending people to cages that don't need to be there, that you can truly rehabilitate by keeping them in our community, keeping them with their family, keeping them with people that they are connected to, and they may not even realize it, and helping them to really walk backwards. What has happened to them, what's going on in their lives, and helping them to understand that they have the power with the help of the community to change it and to do better. That's what we're building out with the DRC, and that's what I am so excited about.
Thank you both so much. I have to say I was getting chills now and then while you talked. It's so impressive. Your concept of connectedness, I think, is so powerful, that fact that we are all connected, in so many ways, and that it's broken connection, broken relationship that pushes people in desperate directions in the first place. I just am so moved by that. we have several questions, and one that comes up for me is what systems do we need in place to make restorative justice practices the norm? Are they the norm now in Washtenaw County?
I would say it's still not the norm. It's a goal that we, create it as an option, and then eventually it becomes the norm. But it is not the norm now. No.
How does it become the norm? What role do citizens play in making that the norm?
I think you guys have played the biggest part, quite frankly, and there's still more work to do, but you elected a prosecutor who spent 2 years stomping around the county saying that if elected, he was bringing restorative justice to Washtenaw County. And you all came out and you voted for him, and you voted for the issues and what he stood for. So that was the first part. And to be able to continue down that road, I invite folks as we set up some of these community events, and we're going to start on the east side of the county in Ypsilanti and Ypsilanti Township, where we're seeing the most concentrated, folks, marginalized folks, poor folks, folks of color, our young people. They mostly come from 2 different zip codes, from Ypsi and Ypsi Township.
Yeah.
And we're going to be working with folks who've already begun to do the work of restorative justice, and folks over at the Grizzly Center that Belinda was, I understand, instrumental in helping to start. And being able to have community sessions and community dialogue, and dispel a lot of the myths around restorative justice. A lot of folks think that it is just a hippy dippy, kumbaya, let's all just sing peace songs, kind of a concept, and it's not. And being able to have that dialogue, I think is going to be the most helpful in the community, being able to spread the word that this is something that is good, and that we talk about making our community safer. That's it. Sending people to prison who don't have to be there, that's not making us safer, because we know that they're coming out, and we know that recidivism rates are quite high after you send someone to prison. So the biggest role the community can play is to remain engaged, continue to come to events like this, learn what the truth is so that you can easily separate the truth from the myths of restorative justice, and being able to push this out to other people in the community who can't hear us.
I should imagine that some people would complain that, engaging the victim in an not the victim, the perpetrator in an accountability process. I can just hear people saying, he's just making excuses. You're just letting him make excuses. Is that one of the things that you hear from critics?
Yes. And what I'll say is, you can make excuses quickly when you're in a courtroom for, all of a few minutes, when the judge asks you if you have anything to say, and you want the judge to have mercy on you for being, before he or she sentences you. But when you remove that and say, no, this is not just a few minutes, you're standing up next to your lawyer, putting on a good show. You're sitting face to face with the person that you hurt. You're going to see them cry. You're going to see them maybe scream at you. You're going to see them explain to you, you're going to hear and even feel them explain to you how your actions truly impacted them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to just turn away from that and say good, nice, clean words for a few minutes, because those circles, they go on for 18 months.
Right. It's quite a rigorous process. I was also struck by your comment about the victim needing to be heard. And immediately I thought, well, there's the victim impact statement, but you're right there. But do they get their questions answered? Do they get any sense of understanding about what happened to them and why this happened to them? Do they get any real sense of safety with a victim impact statement? And the answer is no. And it perpetuates that us and them kind of setup, right? Like, the victim is talking to the bad person who hurt them for obscure reasons. So restorative justice, I see how that gives the victim a voice. That's so important and so healing for the victim too. So it just feels to me like it feels very, very labor intensive to do restorative justice. I'm thinking about Belinda and how big her budget is, and how big her budget needs to be, and how many volunteers she needs, and whether she can take some from the audience, because it feels like it's just a big system. We have a big criminal legal system. And so what are the places where we really need to build up capacity in order to normalize restorative justice?
Well, one way that we are working on is through the State Court Administrative Office, and being able to ensure that defendants who have constitutional rights that must be protected, to ensure that they are in fact protected. One of the key concerns that we're working to address now with our partners in this work is if a defendant goes into a healing circle and in the process of really, peeling back the layers and unpacking the trauma, if they say, that last year they engaged in some pretty harmful activity and law enforcement was never aware of it, how are they, if they are, on this path to healing, how are they guaranteed that them sharing that information is not going to result in new criminal charges?
Right.
How can they be guaranteed that in the process of unpacking what they did with the current offense, and then they turn out to not be successful, with the DRC, and the case goes back to the traditional track and we have to continue prosecuting it, how are they guaranteed that we won't take something that Belinda's staff hears in a facilitation and then we turn around and use it against them in a trial? That disincentivizes them from being open and transparent and doing the work that restorative justice is all about. And so that's something that we are working on the diversion side of things with the State Court Administrative Office to see if we can get a pilot program because we want the state to have a courtroom specific to restorative justice. And so our office is really focusing right now on fine-tuning the details to start the deflection part of this pre-charge. Then you don't have a lot of that to worry about if the person has not even been charged with anything. So that's one, I think, fair concern that our partners on the other side in the defense world have that we're working to address.
Mm-hmm. And is the decision to deflect or divert, is that primarily, whose decision is that?
That's our decision as the prosecutor's office to offer it as an option, but it's the victim. This is something that we tell the victim, this is an option. We don't push folks toward it. In fact, a DA out in California, Chase Boudin, he got a little bit of hot water, I think, for his office trying to push folks toward restorative justice. You can't do that. You got to offer it as an option. If you do the work of offering it as an option in a very knowledgeable way, people bite. You have to push them. But if a victim says, no, I don't want to do that, then we don't do it.
Yeah. Sometimes they come back and change their minds and say, well, yeah. Do you always offer it as an option, or are there cases when you say, no, that's not an option?
We have decided based on what we've heard from the community that our county is not ready to engage in restorative practices involving certain crimes. And so I gave an example of armed robbery earlier, but in fact, as a community with our partners, it has been decided that we will not offer restorative justice for armed robbery, for assault with intent to murder, for murder itself, for criminal sexual conduct, for domestic violence. We don't want to cause more harm than good. And we're being very, very careful because as Belinda stated, we are building this from the ground up. We're really taking a pre-charge model, deflection, from impact justice. And then we're taking a post-charge model, diversion, from common justice. And we're doing a blend of the two models and the two programs. And then we're also on top of that layering what our community has spoken up and said that they want and need. Let me back up. I apologize. I've neglected to also shout out several folks on the Zoom screen who are a part of a working group around restorative justice that Ellie put together shortly after he won the primary and knew, because he didn't have a general election opponent, that he had some time to really, find his footing and make a good, smooth transition to office. So he created several working groups comprised of members of the community, stakeholders, subject matter experts, and he allowed for folks to really help him craft his policies. And a lot of those groups are still convening, and restorative justice is one of them, because we want to make sure that in an effort to give the community what they say they want and need, that we are still being tethered to the community. We can't speak for them, right? You have to allow people who are subject matter experts and have been most impacted to lead this work. And so, our community has made it clear to us that right now, as we're starting this program, it's a little too soon to start, sending cases that are very serious and in nature and violent crimes down the restorative justice path. But that's not to say that we're not doing it ever. We're just not starting with that right now. We need to make sure that we're doing this right. If we do it wrong in an effort to just do something quickly and this blows up, we may not get this opportunity again.
Yeah, right. That makes total sense. And as you were talking about the harms that perpetrators typically have experienced, layers and layers of trauma, I think you said, it's hard to imagine unpacking those. I mean, if that is a complex and lengthy process of neutralizing some of those harms or healing people from some of those harms. So that's very interesting. So somebody asked what's changed with the election of a new prosecutor. And I think you've really been very clear about that. Anything else that you want to add that you haven't mentioned already? I mean, we all love Ellie Savitt. We're very proud of him, our prosecutor. So, or maybe a question is how is Ellie's practice different from what we're used to?
We bring a harm reduction model to the work that we do here in the office. And that's something that really connects Ellie and I. We both have, a huge capacity for empathy. We both understand that people are valued and are capable of being redeemed. We believe in redemption. We don't believe in punishing people just for the sake of punishment. And we don't believe in responding simply punitively if we can respond differently and choose to invest in folks, get to the root cause of why they're committing crimes, and provide them with the resources they need along with an off-ramp to really be contributing members of our society, to really contribute to a more safe community. And that's in everything that we do. We just announced a partnership yesterday that we have with Washtenaw County, My Brother's Keeper, and the Vera Institute of Justice. And that partnership is very simply to create an off-ramp and keep young men of color out of the criminal legal system.
Yeah.
And that's something that we don't have a problem saying, because this system, if you look at the numbers, it's kind to say that the system has not been kind to young men of color. But the truth of the matter is that it has decimated families of color. Decimated for years. And it's certainly time that someone sitting in this seat with this kind of power decides to do something about that and to change the course and truly go in a different direction to end mass incarceration, because mass incarceration is not keeping us safe and, quite frankly, is making us less safe.
And besides the costs are just so immense, and I mean the social costs and the emotional costs and all of those. So I know that you've been doing work on helping returning citizens survive and thrive after incarceration. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, because that feels like it's kind of part of this process?
So we have stood up a conviction integrity and expungement unit here in the prosecutor's office. something that both Ellie and I talked about on the campaign trail. I wanted to expand the one in Wayne County. He wanted to start one here in Washtenaw County. So when we teamed up, it was a no-brainer that we certainly were starting it. And we reached back and got lucky enough to be able to steal one of the best and brightest in this business doing that work from the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, Francis Walters. And Francis heads up our conviction, integrity, and expungement unit. And we believe that if someone has committed a crime, been convicted, they have done whatever the time is that the judge has said that they have to do, be it probation, jail, or serious prison time at the Michigan Department of Corrections. And then they've come out and they have done everything right, stayed on the right side of the law, contributed despite the obstacles to society, that they should be afforded an opportunity to not have that hanging over their head forever. Mm-hmm. When you talk about the concept of a criminal record, it still baffles me. Still, after all of these years working in the criminal legal system, what is the point of that? If someone has done something and we really believe that we are more than the worst thing we've ever done on the worst day of our lives, why is it that that record follows them? What good
forever.
Does it do? Right. It does. Yeah, forever, unless they're in a position to get it expunged.
Right.
And most folks don't know that they can get a record expunged. Most folks can't afford to go hire an attorney to help them get their records expunged.
Right.
You know, I know what that cost is like. I was in private practice, you know, and so to be able to have a unit run by a phenomenal attorney that we don't go around the county and the community, from bus stations to restaurants, and, you know, approach people with flyers and goodie bags. And the goodie bags are to entice them, right? Like, hey, we have goodies in this bag. You want to come talk to us? And to be able to tell them, hey, did you know the law recently changed and expanded and allows more people to expunge more criminal records, you know, and then be able to have a laptop and internet set up on site. Hey, if you just walk right across the street or go right next door, I got somebody from my office who will run your criminal record for you and tell you if you're eligible. And if you are, you still don't have to pay anybody. We'll take your information and we're going to give it to one of our partners that we work with, Michigan Works or the Washtenaw County Public Defender's Office. And, you know, we will ensure that you have someone follow up with you for free that will represent you for free and being able to get this off your record. Because without it, you're relegated to the bottom of society oftentimes.
Right.
If you have a criminal record, it oftentimes will dictate where you can work, where you can live and where you can't live, and if you can get public dollars for education.
Yeah, right.
And how does that keep us safe?
Yeah, right. It's really terrible. That is a whole, I mean, that's a whole nother option. I mean, not an option, but an opportunity moment for restorative justice, you know, to come into play too. And our mutual friend Kathy White, I know Kathy's been involved in helping returning citizens get back to a normal life. The partners you're talking about, these are largely pro bono attorneys, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, pro bono defense attorneys. We really appreciate it. Let me see what time it is. Okay, good. We got a few minutes. We know that pretextual traffic stops are extremely destructive to communities of color. Can you talk about what, if anything, the county prosecutor's office can do to decrease or eliminate these stops? I mean, I'm not sure. I just don't know. So can you help us out?
Absolutely. So when we came into office, I want to say maybe our second or third week into office, we dropped a policy, made it public in an effort to be transparent and accountable. And we very clearly laid out, we will not charge and authorize cases involving, contraband that's found as a result of a pretext stop. And for those of you who don't know what a pretext stop is, it's a routine traffic stop that law enforcement officers make. And once they stop the car, they ask, you wouldn't mind if I look around in your car, would you? You're gonna give me consent because you wouldn't have anything that you're not supposed to have, would you? And then the driver gives consent. The car is searched. Guns or drugs are found, not being used, but found. And then from a basic, simple traffic stop, they're sent to jail. And after the fishing expedition in their car, they are also sent to our office requesting charges. We've made a policy that said we'll deny that.
Mhm.
We will deny it. Pretext stops are racist in nature.
Mhm.
And you all, many of you have heard Ellie himself say, as a white man, if he's stopped for a traffic incident, he's not asked if his car can be searched. He's not asked if he minds if someone pokes around, because of course he wouldn't have anything in the car that's illegal, right? He's never been asked that, and quite possibly will not be, simply because of the color of his skin. And we know that a lot of these pretext stops have led to the unjustified killing of Black folks in this country.
Right.
We've been seeing it play out time and time again, especially in the last several years.
Mhm.
And so we have said, you know what? If we're not going to authorize it, that might just curb the behavior. And this is a policy that we previewed with our law enforcement partners before it was made public, because we wanted feedback from them. And I can remember one chief in particular saying, you know what? I don't think my department is doing that. But if you're finding that they are, I want you to call me personally and tell me, because
Mm.
I don't want to be involved in pretext stops, even though they are legal.
Mhm.
They are. They shouldn't be.
Right. Right. I mean, most white people aren't going to get stopped for a cracked taillight, for instance.
No,
You
no,
know,
no.
yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned the law enforcement authorities, the police departments. So what kind of reception are your innovations getting in the police departments and the sheriff's department across the county?
Well, I think that we have one of the most progressive sheriffs in the state. And when I tell him that, he chuckles and he says, I'm the most progressive in the country. And I say, okay, I think I agree with that too, though. I agree with that. Yeah. He is a man that believes in training and implementation carefully. In fact, we are working closely with him on the new LEAD program, the Law Enforcement Assisted Deflection and Diversion program that we're modeling after King County. And we have meetings bi-weekly to fine tune that partnership and program that we have, not just with the sheriff's office, but with CMH. To be able to assess folks and get them the help they need, if they're dealing with a mental health or behavioral health issue, and are the frequent flyers that law enforcement, they know. The folks on the ground, they know the frequent flyers that they're coming into contact with every day, and they know if there's a behavioral and mental health issue that really cannot and should not be addressed through the traditional criminal legal system, and to be able to give them an opportunity to go a different route if they don't want to be prosecuted, which most of the time they don't.
Mhm.
And so we're working closely with him on that. And we meet regularly with his office. We have an open door. We may not always agree on things, but certainly if our office, for instance, denies something that the sheriff's office thinks should have been authorized, they will say, hey, we'd like to meet with you. And we'll say, okay. And they write to us and they share their perspective. Our office is doing ride-alongs with them because we have to be able to bridge that gap of understanding and know what the folks on the ground are dealing with. I'm sitting in my office at my desk every day. I'm a lawyer. I'm reading things. They're on the ground, right? They're on the ground doing the work, interacting with the people, and to be able to sit in the car next to them to see that, it certainly helps us understand more of what they're dealing with and what they're going through. And we have that in our heads as we're reading things back here in our office at our desk. And I love that our partnership is evolving, and that they feel comfortable saying, hey, we have a question. We'd like to know. what we could have done different to have gotten this charge authorized, or would you just never have authorized it, period, so they know how to move. It's a evolving and a working partnership. Same with other law enforcement departments. I think that, you know, we interact quite often with the sheriff's office because they, quite frankly, have so many different areas of the county that they're patrolling as a part of their jurisdiction that we interact with them over. But other departments, we work with them and we offer the exact same. Chief Cox in Ann Arbor. We're going to start having monthly meetings just so that we can make sure that if there are any issues, that we're working together and not against each other. Because we're all partners in this work. Law enforcement, public defender's office, all of the stakeholders, we're all partners. And we are all here, contrary to what a lot of folks believe. I have not met a police chief that is not here for the safety of the community. Now, if we think about it differently, that's okay. I haven't met, you know, a lot of people that all agree and want to do things the exact same way in the same direction. But at the heart of it, we all want to create and build safer and more just communities.
That's wonderful that you have those productive partnerships. And I guess not surprising, but we're very fortunate about that. We have a couple questions. How about juvenile diversion? What does that currently look like?
So that's actually one of the programs that we just announced yesterday. We're constantly looking for ways to expand our juvenile diversion program. And in fact, we're working to stand up a juvenile assessment center in Washtenaw County where we can do the exact same thing, you know, pre-charge, take a young person to be assessed, you know, and it's this hub that this young person will then have access to a lot of different options, a menu of options, if you will. And so if the issue is they need a role model and a way to channel some of the energy that they have and to really engage in something that they're very passionate about, if it's related to music, music production, graphic design for an album cover, right? To be able to connect them with the Washtenaw County My Brother's Keeper and to be able to put them in their hands for one of their cohorts and for a period of several months. And if they complete that program and all that they've signed up to do through that program, then we never authorize the petition and we successfully keep them out of the system. We're working on building out another option with local churches who have community centers and are inviting young people to come take part in the activities that they're doing. We're working to build out another option through local restaurant owners. One in particular that I'd love to shout out, the Detroit Street Filling Station, run by a phenomenal woman named Phyllis. We have just engaged with her, and she is going to be hiring some of the young people that come through our office for an internship and allowing them to work and gain some valuable work experience, interact and be mentored by some of the adult employees that she's hired who have been justice impacted, and really go about their healing in a more holistic fashion, and not in a placement center or a juvenile detention center. And we are constantly adding ways to provide off-ramps to our young people because we understand that that is not something very often that's a part of the conversation or the equation. You know, we look to en masse incarceration for adults and find ways to keep either adults out or to get them out. But we don't really apply that to our young people. We talk about the need for our young people to have these options, but we really aren't working and applying that to our young people. And that's what we're spending a good chunk of our summer doing.
That's fantastic. This is the last question, and because we have to leave, and it's been so incredibly interesting, but are there any partners that are working that you're finding so valuable in the community that you'd like to shout out that you haven't mentioned?
Oh, you're going to get me in trouble now because I'm sure if I start trying to do that, I'm going to forget somebody.
The Academy Awards.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. Forget that question then. This question, what can, us regular community members, how can we help?
spread the word about our expungement efforts, spread the word about our restorative justice program that is being built out, spread the word about the juvenile diversion programs and our partnerships with My Brother's Keeper. Spread the word about the LEAD program and educate yourselves about these programs. Go online and read about King County's LEAD program and what it's done for the community. We talk about the worst place for folks who have mental and behavioral health issues being in the criminal legal system. And we've now created an off-ramp. And it's something that I understand our sheriff has been working on for several years to bring here. And so I encourage folks with, I know that I've dropped little tidbits here and there this evening, but for everything that I've introduced you to, or if it's not an introduction, reminded you of, go online, read up on it, educate yourself, and simply spread the word.
Great, wonderful. And I want to pick something up out of chat because Kathy Wyatt says that the prosecutor's office and public defender's office have jointly stood up the Washtenaw County Community Stakeholders Reentry Committee with working subcommittees drawing on the best of the old national MPRI model and adapting it to Washtenaw County. So thank you, Kathy, for that information.
I forgot about that one. You see how I forget about things? We're just doing so much.
See,
So
if I forced you to name names, you'd be in trouble. Belinda, Belinda, I really want to ask you more about your work in schools and how that might be systematized. We're almost out of time. In fact, we are out of time. I'm so sorry. I think we should have you back, both of you actually, have you back to tell us more about what needs to happen in order to make this, these efforts system-wide and what we can do to help. Meantime, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for your work. It's so, so important and so valuable. And thanks everybody for joining us for Brews and Views tonight, and our intrepid tech team, Nancy and Brucken and Susan Woolley. Thank you very much. This month, on July 23rd, our Lunch and Learn program continues our quarterly series on criminal justice reform and restorative justice. So on the 23rd at noon, you can talk with and listen to Dr. Lisa Jackson, who's chair of Ann Arbor's Independent Citizens Police Oversight Commission. She'll speak on the ICPOC's initiatives and progress. She's also a neuroscientist and incredibly informed and informative. So that's on July 23rd. And then next month on August 18th, for Brews and Views, we're going to be joined by Desiree Simmons, who's co-director of the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, and Reverend Joe Summers. The two of them are going to be discussing progress on the Crew report recommendations 1 year after they were issued. The Crew report is Citizens for Racial Equity in Washtenaw County. It's a comprehensive, very impressive report. Both Ms. Simmons and Reverend Summers were original members of that working group who produced the report. So we're looking forward to hearing from them. We hope you'll join us. You can look for details via email or on our website, lwvannarbor.org, or on our Facebook page, facebook.com LWVAAA. If you want to register for the events, go to lwvannarbor.org and click on the calendar. We look forward to seeing you at all of our events. And again, thank you so, so much tonight for being here. Victoria and Belinda, you informed us wonderfully, and we really appreciate your work.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.